Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and we're going to continue our lesson today talking about cellular energy. What I really wanted to focus on today is that super important molecule called ATP. What does it mean? How do we use it? How does it provide all the energy for your cells? So hang in there with me today. We're going to explore this and figure out all about ATP. So let's go ahead and get the ball rolling. So please remember that ATP is the currency that your cells need in order to perform any function. Okay, we really need that ATP because that's the form of energy that your cells like. Remember that energy is the capacity to do work. Okay, cells have a lot of jobs to do. They're moving around, they're dividing, they're growing new organelles, they have a lot of life processes they have to do. They need energy to do that stuff. Okay, your cells constantly use energy to build new molecules, contract muscles, perform active transport. We can't do that stuff without energy, and the energy we need is called ATP. Without the ability to obtain and utilize energy, life would cease to exist. Okay, so let's dive into this in a little bit more detail and figure out what is ATP anyway. Okay, well, one key compound that cells use and store energy is in the form of ATP. What does ATP stand for? It's a long scientific word that means adenosine triphosphate. Now that sounds confusing, but what's really going on here, let's focus on the second part of that word, triphosphate. That prefix, TRI, does that make you think of anything? When I see triphosphate, I'm thinking of things like a tricycle and a triangle, right? What does tri mean? Tri means three. Here we have three phosphates, so adenosine triphosphate, three phosphates. If you look real close here, there are three P's. Each of these P's is a phosphate, and you can see that there's three of them. Now the energy for this molecule, ATP, is actually held in the bonds between those phosphates. So what happens is if I can snap one of those phosphates off, it's going to release a little bit of energy, and we can use that energy to do all of these important things. So an ATP molecule is kind of like a battery, and when that battery's full, when it's got three phosphates, we can use it as energy, okay? It's called ATP. The adenosine is this nitrogen base over here. So it's got an adenine in it and then three phosphates. ATP is composed of an adenine, a 5-carbon sugar known as a ribose, and three phosphate groups. What we really want to focus on are those three P's, okay? That's where the energy is in the bonds in between those phosphates, okay? So what is ATP? Well, remember that ATP is the energy our bodies store energy in. It's a compound called ATP or adenosine triphosphate. Okay, when you use ATP, it is converted into ADP. So remember the T in ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. When we break off one of those phosphates and we only have two, it's called adenine dual phosphate, and now it only has two phosphates in it. Okay, diphosphate. Okay, so what does that really mean? Well, I kind of told y'all this just a second ago. Remember that the energy is stored in between these bonds. Okay, breaking the chemical bonds release energy. Here's kind of how you can think of it as like a formula. Okay, so ATP plus water, we're going to do something called hydrolysis here. So we're going to split one of those phosphates off with water. That's going to yield, that's what that arrow means, it's going to yield ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate, so now there's two phosphates, and an additional phosphate plus a little bit of energy. So if we can take ATP and snap one of those phosphates off, it's going to produce energy, which is great for us, okay? So how is this used? Well, ATP, once it's broken down, it's going to release a little bit of energy. Some of that energy is going to be released as heat, but here are some of the other things we're going to use it for. We can use ATP and the energy in it to synthesize molecules for growth and reproduction. We can use it for active transport, so things like endocytosis and exocytosis. We can also do mechanical work with it. An example of this would be like muscle contractions or movement of cilia and flagella and other organelle movement. And so I just kind of wanted to direct your attention to that picture over there on the right, and just so we can kind of talk about it a little bit. You can see that ATP is at the top, okay? Remember that if we break one of those phosphates off, that's going to release a little bit of energy for us. If you follow that arrow down at the bottom, ATP snapping a phosphate off is going to yield ADP plus one phosphate. That's like a battery that hasn't been charged yet. And we can take that ADP, if we charge it up by putting another phosphate on it, boom, now we have that, it's like a rechargeable battery. The battery has energy in it again. Okay, so ATP releases energy, it turns into ADP, we can put another phosphate on it, and it's like charging a battery up. Okay, so this is kind of the process on how that happens. We have adenosine diphosphate, which is adenine and two phosphates. Okay, it's got two phosphates instead of three. ADP holds some energy, but not as much as ATP. And just to give you an example of what's going on, here's our ATP molecule. It's got three phosphates. We're going to do something called hydrolysis to snap that last phosphate off. That's going to release a little bit of energy. Here's the energy over here, okay? This arrow is like telling us that it's yielding something. So here's what we're getting out of breaking down the ATP. When we break down ATP, we get a little bit of energy. We get that ADP molecule, which again is diphosphate. So now there's only two phosphates here, and we've got a leftover phosphate here. Now, just because this battery doesn't have any charge in it now doesn't mean we just throw it away right away. We're going to want to recharge it. And if we can get that phosphate back on this ADP molecule, we'll make another ATP and we can use it for something else in the future. Okay? Great. So where is this ATP produced in a cell? So we've been talking about ATP a little bit. Where does it come from, right? Well, this is produced in an organelle. Take a look at this picture. Does anyone know what organelle we're looking at here? If I give you a hint, if I tell you its nickname, that's probably going to give it away. I'll go ahead and give you the nickname is the powerhouse of the cell. Yeah, so this is the mitochondria, right? This is what it looks like under a microscope. You can see it's got this interior membrane. You see all those lines running up and down it. Those are called cristae, and we use those to make this ATP, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail later on. So this is a mitochondria. This is kind of what it would look like under a microscope. Okay, so mitochondria, they are a double membrane bound organelle. The inner membrane is enclosed, it's filled with a fluid. There's those lines or the folds are called cristae that increases the surface area, and they contain their own small circular DNA. This is where the ATP is going to be made, and we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail coming up next class, okay? Y'all, thank you so much for following along with me today. This stuff can be confusing, so we're just going to do a little bit every day. Your teacher has some work for you to practice this stuff on. Make sure to give it your best effort so that you can figure this stuff out, and I hope everybody has a great day.